sometimes the easiest part of the work is getting the story, right? Because so often it's right in front of us. What's more difficult is distinguishing your work from the pack. It's how you tell the story that makes it meaningful and sometimes more revelatory than your competitors. One of the best storytellers in journalism, from politics to professional sports, is Mike Leibovich. At his best, Mark has a knack for posing uncomfortable questions and then answering them by holding a mirror to our public lives or our lives in general. And I thought this passage was extraordinarily interesting and a good sample of his work. Quote, "This is not who we are," unquote. This would-be guardians of America's better angels have been scolding us with this line for years. Or maybe they mean it as an affirmation. Either way, the axiom prompts a question. Who is, quote, we, anyway? Because it sure seems like a lot of this, quote, we, keeps voting for Trump. Today, the dictum sounds more like a liberal wish than any true assessment of our national character. Mark is an award-winning staff writer at The Atlantic. He has authored 5 books, many of you've probably read, 3 of them bestsellers, including This Town and Thank You for Your Servitude. He's also a recipient of a National Magazine Award for profile writing. Before joining The Atlantic, he spent 16 years at the New York Times, where he served as the chief national correspondent for the magazine there, I believe. And I thought it would be helpful to have Mark talk to us all about not only getting the story, but how we tell the story, storytelling, and what brings audiences who are now more distracted than ever to our work. So please welcome Mark.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks for having me. Thank you all for being here and for being journalists. Now, I assume most of you are, how many of you are actually from here and how many of you are from other parts of the country? So you're from? I'm from Silver Spring. Okay, so there's a mix of local, national. Did you, and so you work at a number of different places, it sounds like. Anyone at the Post these days? How are you holding up? Interesting times, huh? Yeah, wow, it's interesting. Did you guys, have you guys all just started recently, or is it a full-time thing, or summer thing, or internship thing, or what? How does it all? So they're all full-time?
All full-time.
Okay.
We have one freelancer here, correct?
Newly full-time.
Newly full-time.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Awesome.
All right.
Health insurance is great.
Right. Sure is. How many of you are here, meaning Washington, because you want to be here, and how many of you are just here because this is where the job was, or where the fellowship was, or where everything? I mean, how many of you want to go somewhere else? I mean, at some point. I mean, that's a dumb question because who knows what some point's going to look like. Anyway, I will tell you a little bit about what I do and why I like it and why I'm still doing it after all these years. I'm very much a evangelist for journalism, and I'm a huge proponent of young people who are talented and ambitious and who like adventures and who don't like to be bored to go into this profession. I also realize that the profession itself these days is not a great proponent of itself, given all the news that is coming out of it with layoffs and a lot of media companies kind of going south and becoming much less sort of classically journalistic than Kevin and I came up with, but also embarrassingly irresponsible, increasingly agenda ridden as far as political agendas, and it's just not the pure straight ahead search for journalistic truth that we always sort of had as our ideal as we were coming up. But I'm trying to, so I'm well into my 50s now. I have been doing this far longer than I believe I've been doing it. I mean, I can't believe people continue to pay me to do this. It is an extraordinary privilege, but I'm going to try to, it's not that hard. I'm going to try to put myself back into my 20-something self. And I assume most of you guys are in your 20s, right? Pretty much. Because that was one of the beginning of my career, and everyone always asks, how'd you get involved? How'd you get into it? What's your journey been like? How did it start? What were the inflection points and so forth? But also, I mean, it's the most formative period of anyone's career because you really struggle in your 20s. I mean, you struggle in every decade, but your 20s have a real kind of unique sense of discovery about them and uncertainty about them. You don't know what you want to do with your life. You don't know how to go about it and so forth. So I actually really like to talk about my 20s just because it was so, I mean, it's easy to talk about now because, you know, it all kind of worked out. But at the time, it was pretty intense and pretty formative. Basically, I don't have like a career blueprint. And anyone who, well, I mean, there are some people who say, all right, you must go to this college and do this program and then go to this graduate school and do this and that, then get this internship and get this job somewhere and cover 3 city council meetings a week, and then you will get to a bigger paper or website or something, and then eventually you'll wind up where you want to be. I mean, I don't think that works that way in most cases. It certainly didn't in mine. But I found that many journalists I know, most journalists I know, and often the best journalists I know, have done it kind of all by happenstance. They didn't do it from some grand plan. They did it by trial and error. They did it by, again, you know, just sort of fighting through a lot of things. I was an English major in college. I went to the University of Michigan, and English majors often don't quite know what they're going to do. I know because my daughter was one, and now she's a pastry chef, extremely good pastry chef in New York. But she's an English major. So I moved to Boston. I was in Michigan. I moved to Boston. I needed a job, and sort of want ad. Couldn't. I mean, and eventually got a job as the basically an editorial assistant, which is like do whatever the editor or the editors or the reporters want you to do. You're sort of sorting mail, you're answering phones, and so forth. That's back when there was mail and cell phone and non-cell phones, and there was actually a switchboard and everything. So I was a editorial assistant at a place called the Boston Phoenix, which was a weekly newspaper in Boston, which doesn't exist anymore. But there used to be this thing called alternative weeklies, and I guess there are still a few out there, which basically are these weekly newspapers, often quite gadfly-ish. They write a lot of, or they used to run a lot of long, fun stuff, quite irreverent. And so I got this job there, and it was like, okay, now I'm 23, and I'm answering phones, and I'm sorting mail, and I don't know, journalism, sure, why not? That sounds kind of sexy, because I saw All the President's Men. I read the book, I think. I used to read newspapers. I kind of, I was interested in the news. And but I didn't do any journalism in college. It didn't work for the Michigan Daily, and I didn't really do anything. And so this was not my natural path. So I got this job, and it was not a fun job. It was a lot of administrative work. It was a lot of hours. It was extremely low pay. It was probably about $14,000 a year, which was not a lot even for then. And this was like the early 90s. And but the best part about it was I loved being around journalists. I loved listening to journalists' conversations. I loved watching them do their work. They seemed like my kind of people. They were kind of thrill-seeky. They were kind of, they were funny. They were a little bit lone wolves, but also liked the collaborative process of journalism. And just by hanging around, and this is kind of one of the first lessons of careers in general, but hanging around, if you're a fun person to have hanging around, which is not everybody, is a good thing, because people, I mean, never underestimate the value of people knowing that you're a good and decent and ideally fun and pleasant person to be around, and a responsible person, and someone that you don't have to worry about. I mean, the intangibles of just sort of playing well with others and being decent and being kind and being responsible are really overlooked, because most people sort of think, well, you need this on your resume and that in your resume. I mean, when people see that every day, it's a good thing. Anyway, I got to know people. After a year and a half, there was a writing job open. I had a lot of spare time, so I freelance wrote for the paper, so I got paid a little extra, but kind of learned how to do this. And eventually they made me like a junior staff writer, got paid to write, which was an amazing thing. And other people answered my phone or sorted my mail. I mean, I didn't get a lot of mail and didn't get a lot of phone calls, but there were other people now. So I was kind of moving up. Kind of got stuck there, and I covered whatever they wanted. Learned how to write, but also learned how to be a bad writer and a bad reporter, and got taught from really great journalists. Learned how to deal with pressure, learned how to deal with jobs, learned how to deal with office politics, learned how to tell stories in that, as an alternative weekly, we kind of our mission was to see to see things differently, to write things differently than the traditional daily newspapers. I mean, we were I had like this unintentional education about learning how to see something in a way that was a different story or a distinct story than what the standard story is going to be. It was really hard. I became really perfectionist. I became like, okay, I gotta like move up. I want to be good at this. This is such a privilege, but it's so scary, because what if I get something wrong, and what if I fuck up, and what if, I embarrass myself, which is always a sort of a possibility when you are in a public setting like, journalism, right? So it was very anxiety producing, and I was in my 20s, and I didn't have a foundation of success or survival even. It was like, okay, and my first boss there was a total cocaine addict, actually. And after he was the editor of the paper, it's neither here nor there, but he tried to fire me after 2 weeks because I could not get him credentials to the NCAA basketball tournament in Providence. Actually, I got him one credential, but he wanted one for his girlfriend. And I called, and they didn't have 2 credentials for the weekly newspaper, nowhere near Providence. And so I'm like, hey, Richard, I got you 1 instead of 2. And he just pitched a fit, and he fired me. But there was a personnel woman across the office, Sue Kelly, who said, Richard, you can't do that. And he was kind of spiraling at that point. A great guy, gave me my first job, and I loved him in his own way, but he was going through a time. Anyway, I was thinking, okay, so I could have gotten fired then. I would have been shattered. I don't know. I would say, okay, well, screw this. I don't like this profession. I'm not either cut out for it, or I don't like it. But I had a really rough weekend, because this happened on a Friday, and then Monday I came back, and before I knew it, it was Friday, and I was like, okay, I have a week under my belt, and no one seems to be talking that much about anything, and things seemed kind of normal, and I got paid. So survival is a great lesson in journalism and everything, because usually things either work out or they pass, right? Things pass really quickly now because of social media, and everything just moves faster. But news cycles used to be slower, but still eventually they passed. But I got very impatient, and no one was hiring. It was the early 90s. It was before any of you were born. But also, bad economy, newspapers were shrinking. Eventually I moved to California, got a job at the San Jose Mercury News, which is a daily in San Jose, and that was my first daily newspaper job. I got a general assignment reporter job there. It was the beginning of Silicon Valley, or the internet was just sort of getting invented. So I was in Silicon Valley, and even though I didn't know the first thing about business or technology, my stories had the illusion of being business stories because they had job titles and company names like, Netscape and Yahoo and stuff. Netscape used to be a company. Microsoft, things like that. And 3 years after that, I always sort of wanted to work at the Washington Post. That was always my kind of dream, especially, I think I saw an interview with Ben Bradley, the longtime editor of the Washington Post on C-SPAN, and he really inspired me, and he was also a central character in All the President's Men, which everyone should see. Very different time. It was 50 years ago, but it's a great movie. And I like journalism movies. Journalism movies are very inspiring. Spotlight was good. The Paper was good. There were a lot of them. So some of them were bad, but there were a lot of good ones. And so I got this job as a business reporter here at the Post, or there at the Post, I was not a business reporter. It kind of looked like I was, but that was scary. It's like, okay. Well, now I got to move to Washington. I loved California, and eventually, one of this I never really thought of it this way, but since I didn't really care that much about business and didn't know that much about business or know that much about tech, because I was just it just wasn't my thing then. I just was so new. It was all very scary. I eventually kind of gravitated to business stories that were about the people involved, at the workplaces, the managers, how people interacted, the collisions, the communities of work and technology and Silicon Valley and just how technology, it just, the beat, and this often happens to people no matter what they're covering, the beat kind of morphs into, or what you write often morphs into what you're interested in. Naturally so. And my editors were always, they will naturally be biased towards a story that is interesting, and most people are most interested in about other people. People people don't love storytelling does not usually involve abstract things like data or, data's not abstract, but you know what I mean. It's like, not like data. They need humanity for as much as like we are a AI and tech-driven society and everything is moving fast and everything is online and everything's on a screen. Humanity is still pretty much central to what we do, and that was true then, and it's true now. So I kind of made myself a workplace reporter, and I also, I guess being in Washington, I kind of the osmosis of being around politics got me interested in politics, and there was a job at the Post Style section that opened up, I think around 2002 or 3 or something, and the Style section used to be great, and it's just like this great magazine writing and storytelling and real featurey and very writerly. I shouldn't have said used to be. It's still great. It's great. I know a lot of people there. You work for the Style section? It's a great section. It really is. The history, I revere the Style section. And I don't read it that much these days, but I'm kind of digging a hole here. Yeah, it's great. It's the potential of it. It's at its best, it's a great section. So I worked there, and it was fun as hell, and it was like, okay, now this feels like home. And the Post Style section was, it really rewarded storytelling, style, irreverence, humor, experimentation, kind of a knowingness, a kind of wise-assiness in some ways. Again, this was a different time in a very different newspaper, in a very different journalism world. And politics were very different. But it was really fun, and my editors were great, and a lot of them are still there, and I still see, but lesser and lesser of them, fewer and fewer of them. But so that was sort of my foray or my entry point into politics, and I was pretty good at it, and I got a lot of good feedback, and I basically got pretty good at profiles of politicians, and that became my thing, and that was like a real bread and butter for Style. And I definitely got on the map with some of those, and they were pretty controversial. I mean, a lot of it was, I think, probably because a lot of politicians didn't know any better. They mostly talked to me, and part of it was the Washington Post was the political game in town and the newspaper in town. So, and there was not other media. It's not like they could blast out tweets and put things on, whatever, TikTok or whatever. I mean, it was like they relied a lot more on the power and the gatekeeping of the media. But I got kind of noticed. The New York Times tried to hire me in 2005 to do that Washington. They do that style section, or do the political features beat for the New York Times, which I didn't think could work, because the New York Times was and tends to be still pretty buttoned down in some ways, much less so now. But so I said no eventually, but eventually they convinced me that, look, we want this. We want you to help us tell stories in a more freewheeling way, in a way that goes to sort of deeper sort of flavors of humanity around politics and politician and media and so forth. So I did, and it worked out. Very different place. I worked in the Washington Bureau here and spent 6 years basically covering national politics, and usually with like a features perspective, which was great because I didn't have to cover a lot of day stories, which I can do and which can be fun and very satisfying. But I just had longer. I mean, but it was also it was the challenge, because you had to always think about how to be different. Even though I was now working for very mainstream, non-alternative publications, there was always a challenge of going on a campaign plane, or showing up at a campaign event, or showing up at a congressional hearing, or whatever, some kind of political event, convention, and thinking, okay, how am I going to write this story differently than everyone else? Who am I going to talk to? You learn the importance of talking to people, even if it amounts to nothing, which is, there's this expression in journalism, the quality of a journalist's work is reflected in the stuff they don't use, meaning, you're probably going to use even better stuff, but if the stuff that you don't use is good, it means that the stuff you do is probably better. But also, you get smarter with stuff you don't use, and basically your job as a journalist, or a big part of it, is getting smarter. Sometimes in a very constricted period of time, and then the other part of the job, once you've gotten smarter and gathered enough facts to prove that you are smart about something, you got to present it and write it, and that's it's always the hard part. In my view, I always find the reporting usually much easier, especially when I have more than a couple days, because you can just sort of talk and listen and look around and wander around and trial and error yourself, and kind of wander into places that might be revelatory and stuff. So you always have to sort of think of yourself as on the clock and looking to learn, and being open to learning. I mean, you have to be really open to perspectives that you did not think that you were going in to look for, but also be very vigilant about cliches, and very vigilant about tropes, and very vigilant about the conventional mindsets that still underpins a lot of news in Washington, certainly. I mean, it's a very, in some ways, pretty traditional world in some ways, and the world's changing, and you want to sort of put yourself in the kind of dynamic evolution of the world we're all living in, and try to sort of tell stories from that context. I mean, so anyway, then in 2012, I decided I wanted to try magazine writing, and the Times Magazine had a opening, and I started working full-time there. And politics, basically national politics, was my beat. There was a lot of long profiles. I got a long, pretty decent amount of time to work on stuff, which was really fun. But again, there was this mandate to be different, and that was sort of why they hired me. I mean, I remember when I was kind of figuring out whether it made sense to go from the post-style section of the Times. I remember Dick Stevenson, who was the political editor then, one of the Washington editors. Anyone work at the Times? No? Okay. Anyway, Dick is still there. I mean, he's a really good guy. But he's, I kept saying to him and someone else I was talking to who, when they were trying to talk me into going, I said, you know, do you guys know that I don't like do the stuff that most of you do? Like, I didn't like go to school for this. I didn't like, I'm not going to write a good story about X or that. I don't know. I mean, basically I'm saying, you know, don't expect me to be like a grown-up, which is not entirely fair. But anyway, Dick looked at me and said, yes, we're hiring you because you are you. And that was really fortunate. It was really flattering. And, you know, it said to me that they were, you know, willing to sort of play to my strengths and, you know, did not see me as someone who was going to fill a conventional role. Because I don't know. I mean, maybe I would have been, maybe it would have been less fun, I think, if I could have done that. Anyway, yeah, I mean, I could talk all day about this. There is, you know, politics changed quite a bit, obviously. Journalism and political journalism changed a lot when Trump came on the scene. It got a lot more dangerous, like literally dangerous. You know, there's always like hostility to the press, and but it got pretty intense. And I always was a pretty funny writer, or I always thought humor was kind of an important way to reach readers. And I always tried to take a fairly lighthearted approach, not a lighthearted approach, because politics is important and the stakes are high. But I don't know, I always did think that there was a lot of kind of eye roll around politics. But unfortunately, one of the things about Trump is that he really raised the stakes. He made it, there was nothing funny about that story. A lot of people were very, wow, what a great time to be a journalist. And it is, and it was, but it was less fun. It became less fun. It became less funny. And so I had to sort of adapt. And so I went off and I wrote a book about the NFL for 3 years, and no, 2 years. And then I came back, and you know, eventually you figure it out. I mean, as everyone, whether you're a journalist or not, I mean, the world right now seems a lot more serious, a lot more high stakes, a lot angrier, a lot more insidious, you know, a lot more lies, a lot more corruption, you know, go down the list, right? I mean, and it's still a privilege to be able to play in the most important fields like that, but I think it's very different when you are, again, in your 20s than in your 50s. So anyway, so I went to the Atlantic when I was 2022. I missed magazine writing, and I stopped being a Times Magazine writer, and I went back to the Washington Bureau during the pandemic, and there was no real campaign then, so they didn't have much need for me. So I didn't have a lot to do I mean, it was a weird time. I missed magazine writing, and so the Atlantic was, a lot of my friends worked there, and I went to work there 2 years ago, and yeah, I mean, I mostly do politics, but I get to do, I mean, I did a big thing on baseball last year. I did a big thing on Arnold Schwarzenegger, doing a profile of Ringo Starr now, which is, he's an old guy. He was in the Beatles, it's an old band. So that's cool. Anyway, but it's fun, but that's sort of how I got to be here. I mean, I think, and I've written some books, and I'm not writing one now, and that's kind of fun, but I think rather than sort of prattle on here, I think I should try to pivot to questions, right? What do you think?
Yeah, just off the top, what draws you to a subject, apart from perhaps somebody suggesting, you know, either
Signing.
at the Atlantic, that, you know, that you feel like would be fertile ground to plow?
Yeah, I always I'm always drawn to subjects, people who find themselves in utterly bizarre positions, meaning what is it like to be them right now? Meaning this. So Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, he's this kind of up and coming, kind of flashy, very slick, very smart, very talented, very flawed governor of California who is desperate to be president. Everyone knows who he is. Anyway, okay. I've known him a long time. I knew him when he was mayor of San Francisco, and I wrote a piece related to him in I think 2009. So I got to know him then. But he is basically Biden's main surrogate. He is everywhere, kind of campaigning for Biden. He's really good about being in the media. He's a good advocate for Biden. And he's often so good that people say, hey, this guy seems like he's running himself, or certainly wants to. And that must be an odd position to be in. And a lot of Republicans like to accuse him of secretly running running for president anyway, because it's a good kind of, it's a way to undermine the Democrats in some ways. But it's actually kind of true, though. The guy really wants to be president, and I think if Biden weren't running, he would be running this year, and he almost certainly, I think, will run in 2028. So I didn't think he was going to want to talk to me because he is very wary, rightfully, of making it look like he is trying to draw attention to himself, and one that would sort of push the narrative that he is actually interested in being president now, but also it would take attention away from Biden and so forth. And he's always being asked, isn't Biden too old? And he'll say, no, I was just with him. He's never been sharper. He's like, it's amazing. He tells that story lie over and over and over again. And, he knows it, but, he kind of has to play that game, which is absurd. And I'm always drawn to people who have an appreciation for the absurd positions they find themselves in. Newsom is one of them. So he agreed to talk to me, which I didn't really expect. And he kind of told me, like, I said, what's it like to be a super surrogate? What's it like to be campaigning for someone and doing it so well that people think you're running yourself? And, let's go through the absurdity of you telling me now on the record how you don't want to be president and how Biden isn't too old. And the good thing, or actually maybe kind of a bad thing about him, is that he kind of gets the joke a little too well, and he's a little bit more sarcastic than he needs to be. Anyway, I was drawn to him, one, because it's a trip to California, and I'll always go to California. I love California, so let's be honest about this. And he's a fun guy, but also, it's just like he did strike me as someone who was in a unique position. Some stories are just assigned. They wanted me to follow Nikki Haley around for about a month in like December, January, and sort of figure out, like, what is her deal here? She's basically running for the nomination of a party that doesn't exist. And she clearly hates Trump, but of course she can't criticize him too much because then, Republicans will never nominate her. They weren't going to nominate her anyway. But that was a chance. She didn't talk to me, but it was a chance to sort of follow her around and sort of watch her campaign in a way that was quite full of shit, actually, but also quite effective in its own way. It's also politics, both can be true at once. And it was a hard story, but eventually it worked out. But again, she was someone that was in the news. She was someone that was having some success, but obviously, and was drawing crowds, but belonged to a world that didn't exist anymore in some ways. So I found that compelling. Let's see, what else? I guess I like things that make me laugh. I like things that make me mostly just, I like people or things or topics that make me wonder, what is it like to be in that position? And there were a lot of other examples of stories like that. But Schwarzenegger. So Arnold this was last year, but he's 75 years old, okay? This is a guy who literally dominated 3 areas of life. Like, best bodybuilder of all time, basically invented bodybuilding, strongest guy in the world, most successful action hero in Hollywood, so 2. And first try, he gets to be governor of California, so boom, boom, boom. Then he has this scandal. He got his housekeeper pregnant. Anyway, long story. But he's literally probably one of the 5 or 6 most famous people in the world. He's 75. Like basically his whole life is like immortality. It's like movies, immortality, right? Bodybuilding. We're going to live forever. We're going to perfect ourselves and live forever. What's it like to be 75 and not having another act? And I got in to talk to him, which was kind of hard to do, but I interviewed him before when he was governor of California. This was in 2010, I think. And it turns out that he's trying desperately to find a next act before he dies, and he's kind of obsessed with his mortality. And fascinating guy. There's no one like him. Bizarre guy, funny as hell, like insane. And that was fun. They're not all this. They don't all go this well, but I got to spend a lot of time around him and talk about like what is literally a singular life. I mean, obviously, yes, we all have singular, totally unique lives because there's no one exactly like us. But his was just like, talk about how bizarre must it be to be this person. So that's kind of an example of. I mean, again, I think most people, if they have a chance to like hang out with Arnold, they probably would. So it's not a great example, but
Hi.
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 Yes. Hi, I'm Mike with the AP.
I knew that.
Yes, I have a name tag. You can read it. We're doing
Mike
well.
Pasoli.
Yeah,
Good job.
so you got that right. The last name, you got that right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
My question for you: we're talking about humanity earlier, and listening to you talk about your political profiles. I'm wondering what you are looking for, or what you're gravitating to in a profile of a politician that reaches the core of their humanity, other than the person they play on television, which is often what we're greeted with. And
Yeah.
how are you getting to that truth?
Great question. That's sort of the essential thing that we do, because you're right. I mean, they are often playing something very different on television. They have like a whole communications apparatus that is trying to present a truth that is different from the truth that we as journalists are entrusted to find and present. We have to live in that gap, right? And it helps to work at a place, and this is usually more of a magazine or feature-y format where you can kind of call bullshit more explicitly. Meaning, I mean, Trump in some ways made it more okay for a lot of more buttoned down or mainstream publications to do that, because some of the stuff is so over the top. You just sort of have to use words like lie or racism or things that are kind of objectively true, and otherwise you're going to be not telling the truth, and you're going to be insulting the intelligence of your readers. But I mean, as far as getting to someone's humanity, you're not going to get someone to lie on the couch and bare their soul to you and burst into tears and admit everything to you. That's not how it works. And usually you don't have a lot of time or material to, paint as full a picture as you would want. But your job is to do it as best you can in the space and the time you have. So the key is kind of to look for clues and know what clues to look for. If someone is delivering perfect bullshit sound bites, but they're doing it in a way that is annoyingly or glaringly repetitive, I try to point that out. I he or she said repeatedly or 7 different times in the course of a 20-minute interview, and I've done that before. There are times when quite often PR people or press secretaries or communications directors, whatever they go by, they'll babysit for your interviews with them. They'll sit in. It's annoying. It drove me crazy at first, but now it's kind of, I've gotten used to it. Usually they're pretty powerless. They just sort of say, I don't quite, it's kind of like standard that they do, but occasionally like a overly nervous or overly micromanaging PR person or will interject, will say something, we'll try to translate, and I've over the years mentioned that. I think it's always, I do think it's important, and this is actually I think an important lesson, to let readers in on the artifice and the production that people have created for them around interviews. I mean, if someone wants to interview me, we'll go meet somewhere convenient for both of us. We'll have coffee at Starbucks. We'll talk on the phone. I don't know, whatever works. I don't need someone to set it up. I mean, I don't need like someone to monitor it. I don't need someone to send talking points. I don't want any of that. I don't want to be briefed. I just don't. That's not how humans work, right? I mean, same thing these days. I mean, there are a lot of politicians who, so basically in some ways, both parties have some pretty big lies. I mean, I don't mean to both sides that, because I think Republicans are worse, but like the big lie of like, oh, well, the last election was stolen and Biden stole it, or, January 6th didn't happen, or, the justice system has been weaponized against Donald Trump. And then Democrats will often say about Biden, there's like this big lie about Biden, because all of these Democrats who know better will say, he has never been more vigorous. I can't imagine a more fit, younger president or candidate than Joe Biden. And it's bullshit, because they don't mean it, and they say that in private. So anyway, everyone has their big lies and small lies and so forth. But if there's something, if people are just like, I do think it's important to sort of step back and kind of describe for readers like what they're trying to do here and how unnatural it is. There's a great quote, David Foster Wallace. Anyone heard of him? Great novelist, great essayist. He died probably about 10 years ago, actually 15 years ago. He wrote some great dispatches for Rolling Stone on the John McCain campaign of 2000, which was called the Straight Talk Express. It was this kind of rambling, freewheeling campaign. He didn't have anything to lose, and David Foster Wallace covered it for Rolling Stone. And his editor, Jacob Weisberg, who I think he was editor. I mean, I don't know where he was working then, but he was publisher of Slate. He does podcasts now. Great guy. Anyway, he was David Foster Wallace's editor, and one thing he always told David when he came back or before he would leave for a reporting trip is, don't forget to tell readers how weird this is, because it's weird. Like, again, the political world especially does not operate like normal people operate. That's also true of billionaires. It's true of celebrities. I mean, there is a incredible otherness about people like that, because people's natural impulse is to want to fit in and try to be cool and try to assume that like this weird setting we're operating in is normal. We're not our job is not to be part of that world. Our job is to observe that world and to interrogate that world and then try to translate it for our audiences. So.
Style section is waiting.
Hi, Mark. Jesus from.
Oh, I know your byline. You're great.
Thank you.
I do. I mean that. You wrote a piece.
Thank you.
You wrote a piece recently.
I guess
we know
a few
people.
pieces
We know
recently.
people in common.
I'm
Yes.
supposed to, I guess, make the style section great again.
You know what? You're doing it. You're doing it.
I have sort of two questions. One
Yeah.
is, you've worked in a lot of different places, and each publication sort of has its own personality. Every feature writer, as you were saying, reports a lot, over reports, and then has to sort of sift through what's good and what's
Yes.
better.
Yeah.
When you're sitting down to write, how do you locate sort of the right tenor and voice for your writing? And then the second question is, who do you find yourself reading these days?
Great questions. I mean, writing. Unfortunately, I wish this were different, but it doesn't get easier. I mean, it does not get easier. I'm still in awe of people who can do this, but usually the people who can just like do this aren't that good because they don't suffer as much as I do. It's important to suffer. It's hard. I mean, it's funny because. It's a cliche, but you just got to write. Write as fast as you can, and then go back and rewrite and re-edit and everything. I can't do that. I have to perfect the top or the first paragraph, then the second paragraph, and then before I write the third paragraph, I find myself rereading the first and second paragraph, and I'll tweak here and there. I've learned not to beat myself up over that. I mean, sometimes I actually really have to be disciplined and say, okay, I'm going to put my cursor here, and I'm going to pick up, when I get back from the bathroom, I'm going to just write from here because I'm running out of time and I'm blowing this. And, but, this is some really good advice from Richard Ben Kramer, great political writer, wrote What It Takes, which is simply keep your ass in the chair. It's like one of his, it was a book, I forgot, it was like some journalism advice book, which I love. I love those things. There are a lot out there. Forgot the name. It's actually, that one is called The New Journalism or something. It sort of was like a how-to from a lot of great journalists who were kind of in the new journalism tradition, like Hunter S. Thompson and Richard Ben Kramer, people with 3 names. David Foster Wallace. But yeah, keep your ass in the chair. I also I do keep a file on my desktop just called Lines, which is everything I clip and I put it in my Lines file. Anything kind of lyrical, paragraphs, sentences, things that, I've made a couple of those files over the years. There's one on my MacBook, there's one on my phone. And sometimes I'll just read them because it puts me in a mood. It gives me a good lyrical voice in my head that gets me out of sort of gets me out of myself a little bit and gets me kind of in a punchy mood. So that's always a good way to start. What do I read? I read, I used to have an answer I will read the New Yorker, I will read the New York Times every day, I will read the Atlantic, or whatever. I find myself just a lot of serendipity these days. A lot of that's sort of a product of social media because oh, here's a link to so-and-so and that seems interesting and I'll bookmark it and now it's there's 20 stories I bookmarked, so maybe I'll spend the next hour, it's you're basically always curating for yourself. But, the New York Times, Washington Post, Atlantic, New Yorker. I read the Athletic a lot because I like sports. I read, I read a lot of individual writers. There are writers that I always read, and sometimes I'll just read writers that put me in the mood, and sometimes I will. The great thing about journalism these days is also the worst thing about journalism these days is that there are a lot of forms. There's great writing on Twitter. I'm sorry. A lot of it's evil, but some of it's some of it makes me smile, and some of it's worth cherishing in some ways. Books are still great. I don't read enough of them, but and I like classic books. I like Joan Didion books. I like books by David Foster Wallace and any number of people. Anyway, the short answer is I read whatever I can. The one thing I try to avoid is if I'm going to write, I try not to read something, for lack of a better term, hackish. There is hackish meaning, I don't want to insult any publication or form, but there are certain kinds of writing that are just boilerplate and very cliched. at its worst, sports writing is. At its worst, wire stories are. At its worst, political reporting is. I mean, Jeff Goldberg, who's the editor of The Atlantic, has a very strict list of banned words. I mean, he is on this complete crusade against cliches, as every editor should be and every journalist should be. But Jeff is pretty unforgiving, to a point of like, I think he overdoes it. But because sometimes cliches are clever, but you can tweak them, so then they're not cliches anymore. They're different. They're twists on cliches. Yeah. Anyway, but I try to make the last thing I read before I actually sit down to write something fun and punchy. Another thing, by the way, is I'm a big, fortunately, I kind of learned this the hard way. The cognitive behavioral therapy of reward, of like accomplishment and reward in journalism, meaning I will not allow myself to check my email or my text or touch my phone until the clock strikes this, or until there are 200 words on this page more than there were an hour ago. I mean, I'm not always good at that, but it's important. It works. It's a mouthful, but anyway.
Hi, I'm Rachel. I'm with NPR. Thank you for being
Hi.
here. I have a kind of two-part question. I would be curious to hear about some of the reactions and responses you've gotten from people you've profiled over the years, and how much you think about sort of those relationships or source relationships or possible backlash when you're going through the process and setting up the interview, talking to them, writing your draft. How much are you thinking about what they might say afterwards?
Yeah, I mean that's a challenge and a journey. I mean, I think to pretend that you don't ever think about it is a lie, because we are all human and we all want to be liked. We all, and you know, unless you're a sociopath, you probably have the empathy of like, wow, what is it like for this person, no matter how famous or powerful they are, to be reading this or seeing this or listening to this about themselves. The only thing I would say about that is I try to put that as out of my head as possible until the end. I mean, I usually, first of all, editors are pretty good at being lines of defense. I mean, sometimes for like, you know, and hopefully they have the good judgment to help you make these decisions. But, you know, fairness is important. You know, if fact checking is important, and if you have the luxury of fact checkers, which I do at a magazine, I mean, they can be real pains in the ass, and the process can be a real pain in the ass, but damn, it helps. I mean, it helps, and it saves you from yourself. But also, it's kind of a dress rehearsal for the person or the people or the organization or the thing you're writing about, because quite often they're involved in the process of kind of not litigating the facts, because it's ultimately your decision, but sort of, you know, they sort of know what's coming. I mean, one of the things you're not supposed to do is surprise people in journalism. I mean, sometimes you do it anyway, and you can't really have a choice, but yeah, but I think about it. I think about it less. I think a lot of it depends on how much respect I have for the person. I think sometimes do not have any respect for the person I'm writing about, which is not the greatest thing always, but can also be a bit freeing. But also, I don't know, the people I write about, and I think everyone writes about in some ways. I mean, it's both, we're all part of the same humanity, but we're on different teams. We do different things. Like there's I'm not going to name her, but there's a politician that I'm trying to write about I've been trying to write about for a long time. We've had a couple meetings, and I think she's going to like let me hang around with her. And you know, I'm very upfront. I'm like, listen, the two of us are going to have our moments. Like, we're going to have a journey. Like, you're probably going to hate me at times. And you know, look, we're having this great dinner now, but you know, I can't be trusted. I mean, I can be trusted like, you know, in all the right ways. Like, I'm going to try to be fair and accurate, and I'm going to not do my best to just be like straight with you. But like, They, and by the way, it's obvious to them. They know the answer to that. They know what you're telling them, but it's always good to say it anyway because it's knowing and it's sort of placing you in a context, and it's, I don't know, there's something stand up about it, I think. So if you can, I mean, it's very easy to hide behind your byline or your microphone or whatever gives you distance from the people you're writing about. But it's okay to be sort of, to show your own either vulnerability, but also to sort of flex your own kind of brutal candor in some ways, because I think it probably makes you more formidable. So, if that makes any sense. So.
Hi, Diego from Bloomberg. I think most of us here work for hard news and don't have a lot of the time or liberty of magazine writing or feature writing. Do you have any advice to kind of insert some of that irreverence and kind of get out of the box when you're within those confines? And I'm also super curious about the Ringo story, so whatever you can tell us about it would be great.
Okay. Well, first of all, I mean, time and length is by no means a prerequisite for humor, for fun, for voice, and all that. I mean, some of the best favorite stories I've ever done have been in less than a few hours and very short lengths. And it's a lot easier because you don't have to write forever and you don't have to take all that time. A lot of the times you're at the mercy of your publication, and unfortunately, in this AIization and this, and just like sort of the content factories that we all in some ways are working in, it can be, the real enemy of personal style and sort of subjective kind of flair and so forth. I would say this, I mean, generally speaking, in my experience, editors, no matter how conventional the form might be, like being delighted. It's never wrong to try to push the boundaries as much as you can. I mean, don't be offensive, but they can edit you. I mean, if it's good, I mean, they might let you keep it. If it's good, they at worst will cut it, but will appreciate you making them laugh or see things in a certain way, or flexing in a certain way, or showing a side of yourself that they might not have known existed. So, I mean, sounds really trite, but I mean, if you can have fun, that's a great thing. I mean, again, like writing a piece can be really hard and painful, but occasionally I'll just like chuckle at myself, and that's kind of worth it. That's really fun. It's like, wow, I find that delightful. And I might be the only one who does, and immediately edited and stuff, but sometimes I will. It's good to have an editor who kind of gets your sense of humor too. But Ringo, I've always wanted to meet a Beatle. It's always on my bucket list. I don't have a bucket list, but I always Beatles are probably the most famous, certainly the most famous band in history, probably. Two of them are still alive. What must that be like? And so I tried. I was like, hey, I cover politics. I write for The Atlantic. I go to his publicist. They were newer before. This started about a year ago, and I said, hey, I want to really write about him because his birthday is July 7th every year, and he does a Peace and Love Festival, which is getting really big. He does this thing in LA where he lives where people, for his birthday, he wants peace and love from everyone. So now 30 different countries, they're connected by some link, and they proclaim Peace and Love Day on July 5th, and I wanted to write about that and write about that phenomena and so forth. Anyway, they let me come talk to him, so I did. That was in LA last month, and it was 20 minutes, and it was wild. It was Ringo. And I've never had someone that I've interviewed in my entire career, when I tell people who I'm going to interview or when I tell them I'm interviewing, their face just lights up. There's never been someone, usually it's like, oh, I'm going to interview Trump. And it's like, oh. Or I'm going to interview Biden. It's like, oh. Or I'm going to interview, I don't know, Senator so-and-so or whatever. Ringo, I mean, not only is he one of two Beatles left in the world, but Ringo, it's like he brings joy. He's got the joyous name. he's kind of like the humorous one. I don't know. Everyone, like, even people are smiling now when I talk about Ringo. Also, John and Paul, like, more fraught. You know, there's also a debate. Was John the genius or was Paul the genius? Did George break them up? I mean, there's like, Ringo just sort of sat above the whole thing. Anyway, he's got a great story. And then I went to see him in Vegas last week. He does this, like, band. He does this weird sort of barnstorming band. And anyway, he's awesome. And I'm going to go out and spend his birthday next month with him. Peace and love. And I have no idea what I'm going to write, but at some point I will.
Okay, we've got time for one last.
Yeah.
Paul is the genius in the Beagle. Yeah.
Okay, no, that's what people think. Or I'm Paul, John, whatever. You know, that's the thing. Ringo told me he and Paul, they FaceTime once a week. Isn't that sweet?
Yeah.
You know, it's like, I said, really, that's interesting. And it's like, you know, like I FaceTime with my mother like once a week. So, but it's like different. It's like, you know, and he was very sweet about this. He was like, there's like literally one person in the world who knows what this has been like. And I know what the this is. It's like this being like this gigantic life. So yeah, it's important to do a non-political story for me as often as possible. Anyway.
Kwesi from PolitiFact. My question is, have you experienced having to shelve a story after you spend so much time with somebody, I don't know, 2 days, 3 days with them, and then you're like, there's something missing from it and you decided not to pursue it anymore? How did you handle that?
Yeah. Usually, I mean, if I'm going to spend that much time with them, I mean, that I did kind of early on a little bit, but not really. I mean, there's always something. If you're going to spend that kind of time, there's always something. I mean, you know, sometimes like there'll be like maybe like there'll be this scandal or something like events will intervene and like, all right, this is all scrapped, or like something will happen to that person, or, but no, I mean. Occasionally I'll push back on like some dumb editor's idea, because that happens. Always happens. Not always, but sometimes. And usually they'll say okay, but you know, Richard Ben Kramer had this line, which I've quoted before, and I'll quote again, which is, "Journalism is being ruined by a biblical plague of dickheads." And I think by that he meant editors. Now I love editors. They save me from myself. And many of them, or most of them I've been blessed with. But yeah, I mean, part of your job as a journalist, I guess, is pushing back on dumb ideas and also knowing when there is not a story. I mean, like, yeah, I mean, the responsible thing to do, if for a good reason in your head this story should not be written, is to make a case to your boss that this should not happen. And usually if the case begins with, yeah, I'm kind of bored with him or her, it's not good enough, because they're going to want you to do it anyway, because you spend all the time, and, you know, chances are if you spend all this time with them, there's something there. So, but anyway, it's just keeping your mind open. So.
Well, I hate to end it here, but I think we have to. We're past time, and I promised Mark would just be an hour of his precious time, but we are.
Oh, good.
It
Yeah.
went quickly.
Thank you guys. Stay in journalism. You know, it's like it's a great profession, and it's tough out there, but survival is good.
It is. And thank you very much for your questions. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Paul.